Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Paraiso Zio Natural Processed Colombia from September Coffee Company. There's the bag right there. And September, based out of Ottawa, Ontario. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel quite a bit over the last few years, including our recent review of the Geraldo Lopez, a wash-processed Colombian coffee. And I'm sure the first question that comes to a lot of people's minds is, why on earth are we reviewing this coffee given my very strong dislike for processed Colombian coffees? And the main reason for that is because Zio has been one of the most discussed September releases ever, as not only is it extremely popular, but it does seem to sell out extremely quick once it is available for purchase. And given that it has been so heavily discussed, we knew it was a coffee that we would have to review for ourselves. So it'll certainly be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 58. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a significantly toned down one at a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 90 degrees Celsius. I think that translates to about 194 degrees Fahrenheit. And we opted for the V60 with this one, which usually indicates a medium fine grind. However, we went a little bit more, actually we went a fair bit more coarse on that grind as well. Roast profile for this coffee, I do believe that it was only offered in their standard profile, and this one being a more processed coffee, you can tell that it's not necessarily quite as light as some of the other offerings that they do have. And even then, September does skew on the lighter side of things relative to the majority of North American based coffee roasters. So for that reason, we can still align this one with being on the more, we'll just say, standard light by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 29, first impression through the V60, and the coffee definitely offers a lot of the expected processed characteristics in a very prominent and intense sense, especially when it comes to a lot of the berry qualities that are typically associated with processed Colombian coffees. Not as heavy or fermenty as a true natural or anaerobic Colombian coffee, as it has only a moderate level of fermentiness, but it is still very intense. And this first impression did lead me to asking the question, what direction is this coffee going to go? Largely because it's pretty intense, but at the same time, it's not overbearing. And I've been in this position before where we've tried out a more processed Colombian coffee, and I said at the start, okay, maybe it won't be too heavy, but at the same time, I have a feeling it's going to start heading in that direction. That was kind of my fear with this one. Day 32, we opted for the Chemex, and it was a little better, as it does have more of that classic raspberry seed feel that's associated with those more processed coffees. It reminded me a little bit of Las Lajas, which is my least favorite coffee in existence, as it has that kind of anaerobic Costa Rican red raspberry seed feel to it. A bit bright with more of that candied plum feel, as the coffee is mostly offering plenty of the darker fruit qualities to it, and the descriptor of this coffee is skewing heavily on the darker fruit side of things. So that was in line with my expectations. Even then, it's not too heavy, it's not too fermenty based off these first couple of tries, so there was still a little bit of hope and optimism that it wouldn't head in that direction. Day 35, through the V60, correction, through the UFO brewer, and it's difficult to make one of this coffee, as it's still slightly cleaner than the average heavily processed Colombian coffee, but it's still offering plenty of the prominent Colombian berry qualities to it, with a slight bit of graininess to go alongside all of that. Very strong candied sweet sense to it as well, so there's some positives to take away from it, but at the same time, it's very much a profile that I specifically don't enjoy for the exact reasons that this coffee was offering. Day 38 through the V60 with the lower extraction adjustment, so it's the first time we toned it down, and the coffee was a little bit of a head scratcher still, as it's super sweet and heavy, but it's still reminiscent of overly processed coffees, if maybe a slight bit cleaner than the vast majority of them. So I was really confused at this point. I was trying to understand what it was about this coffee that people enjoyed so much, what seemed to make it stand out. But if I'm being completely honest, it was along the vein of the vast majority of heavily processed Colombian coffees, if maybe just a slight tad bit cleaner than the majority of them. Day 41 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and there's still a similar sentiment, as I'm not entirely sure what's supposed to be unique about this coffee, and it still felt lost on me, as it does have a pretty well-defined berry hard candy feel to it, and even then, that's not uncommon when it comes to these coffees, as it's becoming a little bit less clean with time. This time it felt almost medicinal as well, so I could get a little bit of that slight cough syrup-like feel to this coffee, which didn't necessarily seem to help, as it's losing a little bit of its structure as we've just kind of worked with this coffee over time. Day 44 through the V60 with some higher extraction adjustments. And given that we were working on the Geraldo Lopez at this time and we found some great success toning that one down, and we were also working with pushing that one, I decided let's go the other direction with this coffee. Let's see what we can get from it if we really decide to ramp it up. And unsurprisingly, the most fermented it had been to this point, as it's offering that savory olive-like quality that's prominent in a lot of heavily processed Colombian coffees. And I still remember the first time I got that from an anaerobic natural processed Colombian coffee, and it's something that I've sought to avoid for the most part, but I was still curious to see if this coffee would replicate that experience, and it did. It's very heavy with a loss of structure in general, berry forward, but not particularly clean, and it's at this moment that I felt like, okay, I think that this coffee is essentially what I expected it to be. Day 47 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it still feels that same way, as it's offering plenty of intensity and brightness. And I say this with a lot of Colombian coffees, they offer this uneven, very sharp acidity to them, and that seems to be a lot more prominent within this coffee, especially after we pushed it. It feels synonymous with heavier processed Colombian coffees, as it's definitely better than the V60 day, as it didn't have that same olive-like savory quality to it. So pushing this one, better results with the Chemex, but even then, just not necessarily the best results with it overall. Day 50, final day we have for this one, and I decided to go the complete opposite side of the spectrum, tone it down as much as possible, and honestly, it didn't really help that much, as it's still offering plenty of the fermented berry qualities, reminiscent of a processed Colombian coffee. Little else is standing out other than that Las Lajas-like feel, so it's back to offering that red raspberry seed fermented kind of Costa Rican coffee feel. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, we have 2 level 5s. Let's go through those. We'll start with the finished level 5. We'll talk about it with the berry fruit, level 5. This is one of those coffees where I say if it's scoring a level 5, it's not a good level 5 because it's overbearing, and it's overbearing in a lot of those qualities. Now, let me see what the notes they have listed on here. I think it was something along the lines of like a blackberry jam. So yeah, blackberry jam is the main thing that they have listed on here. Red grape acidity, so yeah, it has more of those berry qualities to it. Plums, I mean, stone fruits are pretty low at that level 3 mark. I didn't get a lot of that. I was just getting heavy berries, and specifically a lot of the red raspberries specifically. So level 5, where we opted to put both of those, very heavy and intense in the berry qualities. A lot of level 4s, let's go through those. We'll start with the sweetness level 4. I said it's very important to separate the sweetness from intensity, and while this one does have a candied sweetness to it at times, it's not necessarily overbearing in the sweet sense. If anything, I feel like maybe some sweetness would have helped balance out the overly strong red qualities to this and the very strong acidity to it, but it really didn't. It's a little bit more moderate of a sweetness, surprisingly, despite those candied aspects on the earlier days. So level 4, where we opted to put that, kind of mixed impressions of that, given that the acidity is pretty high at the level 4. It's a victory for me that it didn't score that level 5, largely because the brightness did feel a little bit uneven the majority of the time that we were working with it. So yeah, that's definitely something I didn't enjoy about this coffee. Let's go ahead and move on to level 3s, and we have even more of those. I'll start with the florality actually at a level 3, and that's going to be that very strong perfumey floral, those darker floral qualities that were presented with in this one as well, which I didn't necessarily enjoy. Now the spice is a kind of interesting one because it didn't have that harsh spiced quality that comes with a lot of the Diviso coffees, but when I was making this tasting wheel, I had to focus on the spice, and I thought to myself, okay, it does have at least a little bit of it, enough to the point where I want to push that a little bit higher than I normally would have, because going into that day, I fully expected myself to charge the spice at a level 2, but it does have enough of a spiced quality that bumped that up to that level 3 mark. Citrus fruit level 3, that's a little bit of a victory for me, as it wasn't too overbearing or heavy in the citric sense. Stone fruit level 3, I experienced a little bit of that candied plum on some of the earlier days, but the more I continued to work with this coffee, the further it strayed away from any sort of stone fruit-like characteristics to it. I feel like it might have been a little bit of a priming effect at this one, even keeping it there at the level 3 mark, because I did not get any sort of cleanliness or definition to that stone fruit sense. I think just the overall dark profile did lead me to believing, okay, maybe there is some darker plum-like qualities to this one still. Body level 3, plenty of texture to this one, even if it wasn't something that I particularly needed or desired with this coffee. It did have that juicier body, which I think was one of the notes that they had listed on here as well. And then the final thing worth discussing, the cleanliness level 3. It's probably a little generous if I'm being completely honest. I think that there were certain days where it was verging somewhere between that 2 and the 1, and I wouldn't have had an issue if it was there at the 1. I'm largely thinking of that V60 day where we pushed it and it offered those savory olive-like qualities to it. Outside of that, though, level 3 does seem a little generous given that there's just so much heaviness to this coffee. Higher side, we'll go with lower side of level 3 and we'll kind of leave it there. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, not surprising. It's probably one of my least favorite coffees that I've ever had from September, and it's one of the coffees that's least in line with my own preferences. But I was sold on the hype train for this coffee, and I'm still dying to know what it is that people loved about this coffee so much, because if it's people that tend to enjoy their heavily processed Colombian coffees, I can see it. If it's people that usually prefer washed coffees like myself, then I'm curious as to why there was so much hype around this one. Now, I understand that there are actually numerous Zio coffees that September has released as well, and all of them seem to sell out extremely quick, but I'm not entirely sure why this coffee is continuing to sell out as quick as it is. I missed the point on this one, and I'm just dying to know what the point of it is, which does kind of lead into the type of person I would suggest this coffee to. It reminds me of these heavily processed Colombian coffees, every aspect of it. It's heavy, it's intense, it's long lasting, it's very strong in the berry qualities to it, and it doesn't offer a lot of cleanliness while it still has plenty of that uneven brightness to it. So it offers everything that I don't particularly enjoy about these coffees, and people that do enjoy these qualities, is the direction I can point somebody towards on it. But once again, I'm just trying to figure out what it was about this coffee that sold so many on it. I think for the most part, that's the best way I can leave this review. If you've had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd definitely love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not subscribed. This right here has been a review of the El Paraiso Zio Natural Processed Colombia from September Coffee Company. Thank you for watching.